So they will get at least one crack at it.
The scene where everyone goes over the top is just awful, isn't it? I mean, awful as in it's meant to be awful. And I think that's one thing that you of course you get this from the book, but it's conveyed brilliantly in the theatre, is just the suffocating reality of the First World War. Suffocating because it's trench warfare, and suffocating because of that impending doom, and what you know now from our vantage point to be the sort of the futility of the whole thing as well.
Which of course they didn't know then. They didn't know, and they climbed over the ladders. They thought it was all going to be over by tea time and they were going to have dinner together on the far side of the German lines. But Trevor Nunn's found a very good way of, as they go over, I won't say it'll spoil it for people who want to go and see it, but there's a very good sort of coup de théâtre at the end of that act, and people just are a bit stunned as they sit, not really sure whether to go out and have a drink or not.
I know, yeah, that's very clever. 30 seconds till the news. There's also, Stephen kind of forgets why he's fighting, doesn't he, the lead character at one point?
He absolutely does. I mean, Sebastian told me the first time I met him that it was a story about a man who's been pushed emotionally further than any man can be, without it being a sort of horrific horrific emotional car crash. And so
right. More from Ben. We're going to take the news here, but we'll have more from Ben Barnes and Sebastian Faulks, and a raging debate about George W. Bush to come.
On digital and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News on 5 Live at 3 o'clock. I'm Justine Green. A public inquiry is taking place into the deaths of hundreds of patients at Stafford Hospital, where it's claimed they could have survived if they'd had better care. Michael O'Callaghan's father went there with a fractured arm in 2006, but died of kidney failure. He explained what he hoped the inquiry would achieve.
The assurance that this can never happen again, that there is some system in place where there is a double check on these sort of things, where if families are concerned, someone does listen to them, takes action and makes sure this cannot ever happen again. And I want the people that were responsible at that time to answer these questions. We've had an apology from the current administrator, but we've not had an apology from the people that were responsible for my father's death and many others.
A campaigner for Roma Gypsies has been jailed for her part in a £3 million benefit fraud. Lavinia Olmazu was employed by 2 councils as a Roma outreach worker, but she was also part of a gang running a tax credit scam. Amanda Knox, the American student convicted of killing Meredith Kircher in the house they shared in Italy, has been told she'll now face trial for slander. She's accused of making up claims the police beat her. Duncan Kennedy is in Rome.
She said she didn't mean to slander anybody and that she was just defending herself. A judge went into secret session, came back out and decided that there was enough evidence that she had slandered the police officers. She claimed had beat her around the head. The officers denied that. The judge decided there was enough evidence for her to stand trial, and she'll now do so in next May.
The Commons Speaker John Bercow says a rerun of the election in Oldham East and Saddleworth won't be held until an appeal is considered. The High Court is due to rule on a judicial review application by the dismissed former Minister Phil Woolers. He was stripped of his seat last week for deliberately lying about his Lib Dem opponent in the general election campaign. A building company that claims to be the nation's local builder has gone into administration. Rock, which carries out refurbishment and maintenance, employs nearly 4,000 people. Dirk Phillips is chairman of Exeter Chamber of Commerce.
A lot of it was to do with the social housing contracts and the improvement reductions in that area. So although it's a great concern, I still feel that it won't be quite as bad. And in fact, you previously mentioned Connaught, and Connaught went down with over 200 jobs. All of those staff, as far as we know, have actually found jobs within a very, very short time of that closure.
A shop assistant says she was made to remove her poppy by managers at the American-owned clothing chain Hollister. Harriet Phipps, who's 18 and works in the Southampton branch, says she was told it wasn't part of the uniform.
I just didn't expect it at all, so I kept it on. And then I did get told again to take it off. And I felt really pressured and quite intimidated that I did take it off because I thought I had to.
The Hollister store in Southampton has told 5 Live the policy is a head office issue. Sport now, here's Philip Studd.
Tony Pulis has called for referees to be more accountable for their decision-making and advocates a voting system to determine which ones should be relegated from the Premier League. Pulis is angry at what he sees as a series of decisions that have gone against Stoke City, including Kenwyne Jones' disallowed goal against Sunderland on Saturday. Manchester City have confirmed to us this lunchtime that they're appealing against Mario Balotelli's straight red card for violent conduct. during yesterday's 2-0 win at West Brom. As things stand, he'll miss Wednesday's Manchester derby. Frank Lampard has told us those who think Wayne Rooney is thick are lazy, and the England striker is actually sharp. There's a full interview with Lampard on tonight's 5 Live Sport. And Pakistan have confirmed that their wicketkeeper Zulkarnain Haider has gone missing with his passport ahead of the deciding one-day international against South Africa in Dubai. Reports this morning suggested that Haider had received a threatening message after Pakistan's victory in the 4th match when he hit the winning runs.
Philip, this is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Hello, BBC. Monday to Thursday, 2 till 4. Richard Bacon. Call 0500 909 693. Calls are free from most landlines, but some networks and mobile operators will charge. Text 85058. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. This is 5 Live.
It is 4 minutes past 3. George W. Bush later. Oh, that makes it sound like he's a guest. If only. No, we shall debate him. He's on Oprah this week. Do you think it's time to reassess his legacy? Has history, have people, has the media been too unkind to that guy? Tell me your thoughts. Sebastian Faulks is here, author of Birdsong. George W. Bush.
George W. Bush, yes. I'm not a great admirer, and no, I think he was a tragedy, really, for the United States.
Why a tragedy?
Because the invasion of Iraq was a tragedy, and that was his idea, and it was a very poor idea. And he really understood very little about the rest of the world and has made many more enemies for America than it really deserved.
Okay, well, we shall explore those very points in about 20 minutes' time. 85058, bacon at bbc.co.uk. Ben Barnes is here as well, leading man from Birdsong, which is currently in the West End. I wanted to Sebastian, just talk about the book for a couple of minutes before we come back to the play. I wondered why, am I right in saying that your father fought in the Second World War?
The Second, yes,
the Second World War. Why did you choose to write about the First World War?
I chose to write about it because I was interested in it, and at the time that I was thinking about it and planning the book in the late 80s, there seemed to be a sort of blank in people's memory of it. And of course there was great literature that came out of it, and this was well known, Wilfred Owen and Siegfried Sassoon and All Quiet on the Western Front and so on. But I knew many people of my age then, in their sort of 30s, who didn't seem to know much about it. And I think this was partly because the people who'd taken part in it didn't want to talk about it afterwards. You saw 10 million men slaughtered for no reason. And the other thing was that a mere 20 years later there's the Second World War, which by contrast had been very, very well remembered, particularly the Holocaust aspect of it. So there seemed to be this blank in memory.
There's something about depictions of trench warfare in World War One, when it's done well, that affects me even more than that depicted in World War Two, and I honestly can't quite work out why or what it is about World War One.
Well, I suppose briefly that World War Two, we felt we were fighting for a particular reason, and you could see what the enemy stood for, and Nazism, although we didn't know everything about it in 1939, it was clearly an emergency which had to be halted. And the second thing, of course, was in the Second World War was a war of movement. People moved around, and you had tanks, and you had aeroplanes, and you had armoured vehicles, and it was fought on many, many different places. The First World War was completely static for 4 years, people just plodding over a small area of ground, dying in their tens and hundreds of thousands. So it was particularly futile.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's that, I mean, as you depict, of course, in Birdsong and in the play, the Battle of the Somme, one of many battles in which there was extraordinary loss of life in an incredibly short space of time. But it's people, you talk about this as well in the book and in the plays, people going over the top and losing their lives in their thousands just to gain a few metres of territory.
A few yards of mud.
A few yards of mud is the line, isn't it? Yes. Yeah.
Which would be regained a few weeks later by the other side anyway. I mean, nothing moved really until late 1917, beginning of 18, when the spring of 18, the Americans and tanks arrived. And once tanks arrived, you began to get some movement. But the preceding years had been completely pointless.
I think it is the scale that is the horrifying is the horrifying sort of visual accompaniment to what we're talking about, which you don't get in a theatre, and you don't get particularly, I think, in a novel. This would need to be in a film, or if you go to the sort of Imperial War Museum or something, and you realise that the Germans had dug in their trenches a football pitch's length away from the British trenches. I mean, that's how far away. When we talk about people going over the top on the day of the Somme and charging at walking pace towards the enemy lines, that's how far they had to get, and they didn't get anywhere near because the machine guns would cut them down at knee level.
Yeah.
The one thing, of course, you can do on stage, and which is done very well, is the tunnelling, is the underground scenes, and that when you have Stephen and Jack, played by Lee Ross, you get this fantastic sense of claustrophobia because the set has been able to reproduce this tunnel, which tunnelling was not something I knew much about. I don't know about you, Ben.
Because you have even the very brief footage that we do have from First World War and the few images that we have from planes of the devastation afterwards, we have nothing except the craters, which are still preserved, actually, aren't they, on the Somme? There's this one crater which on the day of the Somme was set off, the charge was set off, and it's a huge crater which was devastating for the Germans. The one, I think they set off 9 the charges. The miners had sort of tunnelled underneath. But we have no idea what this was like for them. I only learnt recently that because it was chalk, even though it was by candlelight, they would get snow blindness. They would have to leave the tunnel because it was so white in there, even with only one candle, 95 feet under the ground. It's sort of extraordinary.
Yeah.